Welcome. You're tuned into Life is a Sacred Journey. Every week, we bring a new perspective to aging and caregiving. Here is your host, Michelle Pope.
Good morning, everybody. We're so happy that you are joining us. I'm still moving my cursor around a little bit, so just bear with me. There we go. You know how hard this is to get everything happening. It is Friday morning, and I want to welcome you to Life is a Sacred Journey. My name is Michelle Pope. I am your host, and this morning I have the honor of welcoming Lyn Barrett to our wonderful neighborhood. And so just say good morning to each other in the chat so that you know that you're there and that you're not alone and that we are in this together. And as you do that, I want to also, Lyn, bear with me a moment. I want to thank Stuart and Jayne. Look at this. They made this for me and sent it to me for my 65th birthday, which was Wednesday. Woo! So thank you so much. And over the next, I got earrings, I got books from Nancy, and inside here is a beautiful hook. And I just want to say to all of you, we are in this together. And I want to thank you for coming back to Life is a Sacred Journey, for people like Lyn coming on to share their stories so that we know when things are happening to us that, yes, it's unique because our story is unique, but there are other people who have been in the world, experienced pain and grief, and made it through, not because they are better than you, but because they maybe got a circle of people around them that help them and lift them up, or they found another way to do it. So Life is a Sacred Journey is really all about that. And it's about being that light and being the change we want to see in the world instead of sitting around complaining and being mean about it. Do something. And so this is my little, and all of the folks that follow us, this is my little do something in order to make sure that I leave the world a better place. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about Lyn. And again, good morning, happy Friday. Get your coffee, get your tea, sit up in your chair, make sure that little core space in your belly is warm and happy, because this is a happy space. This is not a place where you come to be upset and mean. So if you are that person, we invite you to leave now. We love you, but this is a village of love. And if that's not where you are, we will continue to lift you up, but you won't be happy here because this is a love space, okay? And if you can stay and maybe change a little, we welcome you to do that, okay? So let me tell you about Lyn Barrett. I'm so excited. And as you know, I love meeting new people, and I love experiencing life to its fullest. Until I take my last breath, I'm going to live it to the fullest. And so I'm excited about Lyn because she's teaching, or has taught me, and learning more about her, about new terminologies. But let me just tell you. So Lyn Barrett is an author, a speaker. She's a retreat leader and a survivor of early childhood trauma. She was diagnosed with multiple personality disorder, which is now known as Dissociative Identity Disorder, DID, in 1992. She's been doing an incredible amount of work on a blog and has a series of reflections in a memoir titled Crazy: Reclaiming Life from the Shadow of Traumatic Memory. And I've listened to her being interviewed by others. She's also one of my, she retired from one of the most favorite positions that I love, elementary school teacher. I'm going to tell you why. Because a good elementary school teacher plants the foundation for lifelong learning. And if that teacher is partnered with a parent who gets it, oh my goodness, the human beings that come out of the elementary classroom are the leaders of the future. And so I want to thank you, Lyn, for being an elementary school teacher, because you're a parent, you're a inspirer, You are someone who either breaks a person's heart or builds it up. And I'm blessed that I've known nothing but great elementary school teachers. So thank you for retiring from that wonderful, blessed career. So she's done that. Okay. She's been a school principal. So yeah, a leader. And something, as you well know, near and dear to my heart, she's also a church pastor. So Lyn Barrett, welcome to Life is a Sacred Journey. It is an incredible honor to have you here today and to welcome you to this neighborhood. And everybody, round of applause for Lyn Barrett. You know what? We need to applaud each other so we know that we are welcome. So welcome, Lyn.
And I'm welcoming all of you too, Michelle, you and all of the listeners or viewers that you have for tuning in and connecting so that we can all become a part of the same village with the same goals and the same motivations and the same healing too.
Yes, and the same healing. Let's get started though, Lyn. You know, your story, you know, when I first read about, you know, the multiple personality, of course, all of us, you know, have been indoctrinated in my age group. I'm not sure if outside of my age group, but the movie Sybil or the book Sybil. And you know, of course, this drama because it's a movie, but we also know that having you work with memory, having more personalities that come in to help you with trauma, also take snapshots of memory with them while leaving memory that you, as the person that gives them house, give them home, and they secure you. It creates this never sort of planting place for you as an individual. So tell your story a little bit.
Well, you just described that in a really interesting way and a beautiful way, because it is that my mind was a place that where new parts of me were planted, where memories were planted, where emotions were planted. And that's what is true with dissociative identity disorder. So if you don't mind, I like to start with explaining what dissociative identity disorder is.
So that we all know, because
I always begin with the word dissociation because it's it's not one that we use in everyday terminology, but in reality we all dissociate a little bit. And the example I always like to give is if you're sitting in a lecture hall and this boring professor is droning on, and you're looking out that window, and out the window are these kids playing soccer. And so your mind kind of rises up out of your body and goes out there with those kids for a couple of minutes to get away from the boredom that you're experiencing. Now your mind comes back and you go on with life. But that's dissociation. Dissociation is a temporary separation of the mind and the body. And we do it when we're bored. We do it when we're doing repetitive activities, but we also do it to protect us. And we don't do it consciously, but that's a function of dissociation. Because the mind and body are separated for a little bit, it protects us. So a soldier on the battlefield may dissociate at the horrors that he's experiencing or even perpetrating because he's been told to. And his mind and body may separate a little bit, and then they come back together. He goes back home, but that dissociation follows him in PTSD. The same is true for a woman who is raped. She may dissociate in that feeling of being powerless and then being penetrated. That's a horrible loss of control, and she may dissociate to minimize the experience. And then she comes back and tries to go back to work or to go back into the home, and she has PTSD with dissociation. So those are ways that dissociation can be used to protect the person by separating the mind and the body temporarily. And that's what happens with small children. But in the case, and small children may experience 1 or 2 or 3 experiences of trauma. They may dissociate a little bit, but they may not have DID. But if a child experiences trauma, abuse over and over again, chronically, then this separation of mind and body starts to become more formed, compartmentalized, maybe more solidified into different parts. So maybe this part of the child will hold a memory, and maybe this part will hold an emotion. And maybe this part will hold a skill that the child has that helps the child through the day or through the abuse or whatever, So small children, when they experience abuse or trauma chronically, will tend to put those experiences into compartments in their head. Let me explain to you why that is. We know that most people who abuse children know the children. They are either family members or friends of family members. Often they're parents. Now, think of a little,
yes.
a 2 or 3 or 4-year-old child, who do they rely on to survive? Who is the person that they have to come to when they fall down and scrape their knee? It's their parent, and it may be then the person who is actually abusing them too. So there's a real disorientation for the child there. The person who they think loves them and that they love and who takes care of them and gives them food every day and a place to live is also the person who in the middle of the night or in the middle of the day may do horrible, horrific things to them. So there's a need for the child to separate those memories out of consciousness so that the child can go back and act as if the world is fine, because they need to rely on these people. So that's how dissociative identity disorder forms in the child. I should also mention that it also forms because from birth to maybe 8 to 10 years old, the child's brain is still developing, and it's malleable, and it can do that. Now, if you're 18 years old and you experience chronic abuse, you will experience severe and possibly complex PTSD, but you're not going to get DID because your brain is fully formed. Yeah. So you have to be a small child in order to get that. So that's how I explain dissociative identity disorder. I can't remember what your other question was.
That to me is pivotal in the discussion of child development and how in our rearing processes and how as parents, not everybody, I say this all the time, not everybody is meant to be a parent. Not everybody's meant to own a dog. Not anybody, because when you don't understand the complexities of everything that you do and your behavior may be uncontrollable for your psychosis and your stuff, to bring another person into the world is probably the most catastrophic thing that could happen for us as a humanity, because then a broken person fuels the life, another set of brokenness. That's right. So emotionally, though, as you began to grow into your personhood, what was that moment, or where were you in your life when you began to realize there's more to what I know than what I know?
That's right. So we call, when you have more than one person, when you have alters, we call the alters altogether a system. And so I have to speak for myself, and DID can manifest differently in other people, but I would say that there's many people who manifest in a similar way to the way I do. that as I was certainly all of this was happening unconsciously. So as a child, I didn't know it was happening. And then as I grew up and into an adolescent, my parts, I usually call them parts. Sometimes I call them insiders. My parts started to, they were mostly collaborative. I didn't even know they were there. I worked together as a unified individual mostly. I can look back on some periods in adolescence where, now today with more wisdom, I know, oh, this was that part, this was that alter, or that's what was happening here. But I didn't know it in the time. This is who I was. I was just me, right? And then as I grew into young adulthood, I created a family, which was pretty surprising because I really didn't know how to talk to boys and my face froze up. But I found when I would talk to a nice boy, but I did finally meet a man and we married and we started a family. And I can again remember sometimes when, I think that I split off for short periods of time, but it always came back together. And I was happy Lyn, I was happy Lyn. I was a good mother Lyn, model mother Lyn, all of that. And then I was also teaching in a preschool at the time when some of this started happening. And it was a 10-year period. It wasn't a moment. It was a 10-year period, probably from the age of around 35 to 45, where I felt like I was going crazy. And that is why I entitled my book Crazy, not because I was crazy and not because people with DID are crazy, but because I felt crazy. We sometimes feel crazy because of the crazy things that were done to us, but we don't have any memory of them. So our bodies and our minds are doing these things that are feeling crazy. So let me give you some examples of what they might be. First of all, I didn't feel real. That seems very flaky. What does that mean? I can't tell you exactly what it means, but it's incredibly painful when you don't feel real. I didn't feel like I was myself. I didn't feel like me. Sometimes I would experience myself as being up in the corner of the ceiling, looking down on this wretched woman who was going through the motions of life, who was me, but I wasn't there. I wasn't embodying her. I was up in the ceiling, my emotions and my feelings didn't match. I had multiple streams of consciousness going on in my head at one time. I sometimes call them voices, but I didn't really think they were voices. I just thought they were me thinking 10 thoughts at a time, which made my mind very confused. Yeah. I had body pain everywhere. I would often crawl up into a fetal position and go into a catatonic state. Now, that I probably wouldn't have been medically diagnosed with catatonia, but that's how I experienced it. It's that I was like, I couldn't move. I just couldn't move. I actually lost the ability to relate well with my children, who I was so deeply devoted to, but I couldn't break through this veil. I had this veil over me, and I had trouble breaking through it to connect with them. I had suicidal ideation almost all the time. And here's the interesting thing. While all this was happening, I would then go into school and I would teach in my classroom, and I was fine. I was more than fine. I was really good. I was really excelling professionally, but internally and personally and at home, I was going crazy. And that part of the crazy feeling also was that dissonance between feeling like I didn't even exist and then going in and being, the top teacher in this school. It didn't make any sense to me. Now, I should say that in the middle of this, I discovered my husband had been having an affair, and so we had an ugly divorce. And I'd like to make it really clear that my husband's affair and our divorce did not cause my DID. But what it did do is create the circumstances that seem so similar to the original circumstances. The betrayal of my husband mimicked the betrayal of my abuser. And so what started happening is life at home started feeling really dangerous. And so that's why my parts started to split apart. I believe my parts would have split apart even had that not happened, because I was already starting to experience some of that prior to learning about my husband's divorce. But that certainly accelerated it. It's not uncommon for a new trauma or stressor in adult life to create the extreme anxiety and tension that would cause our collaborative parts to split apart, to no longer be collaborative, and to start going off in their own directions, which is what happened to me. And I didn't know what it was, I had no idea. And so I really felt crazy. And then I did check I attempted suicide, and my parts both perpetrated the suicide and saved me. So one part had me kill myself, and then another part, came to the rescue and called someone, and then I didn't tell anybody, I just went back to work the next day. It's like, because that's what you do, right? Yeah.
Going. Oh my gosh.
And I was in therapy at this time, and it was good therapy, but it wasn't focused on this kind of thing. And I ended 2 years later, then I did check myself into a psychiatric unit for 30 days because I was going to kill myself again. I couldn't live this way any longer.
Yeah.
So after that, it's really, it was about probably 8 months later, after the hospitalization, when I was diagnosed with multiple personality disorder. And 2 years later, that term was changed to dissociative identity disorder. And once I was diagnosed, it actually made me helped make sense of my life. I still had the lion's share of the healing work in front of me. I still felt crazy, but at least I began to think, well, maybe there's a reason for this, and maybe I can figure out what it is, and maybe I can heal from it.
And it was, and in that moment, that clarity of having a name, I always feel like when I know what's wrong or when I can name it, then I can visualize it, I can figure it out. But if it's this thing that's in the nebulae and unknown to me, that creates that, like you said, that space of crazy or chaos that
chaos is a good word.
Right, it's chaos that I feel disassociated.
That's right.
The person that I'm trying to be. And so that, I think we all, like you said on the onset, we all experience that moment, and then getting the therapy helps to provide the tools for what, Lyn? What has happened and what is different for you in that space?
Well, the tools that therapy provide, if you find a trauma-informed therapist who isn't afraid of DID, who is willing to work with someone with DID, what those tools provide are to get to know our multiple selves. It is to let them come up out of the darkness of our psyche, and to tell their stories. and to get to know them and to let them get to know each other. Because part of DID is amnesia. We all experience some form of amnesia. And so for me, in one case of amnesia, I had most of my parts didn't know about each other. So as I began talking, as I began allowing these parts to talk to me in therapy and in my journal, then other parts sort of became aware of that too. And so then they start communicating with each other over time, and this takes years.
I was going to say, this
takes years. This is no quick fix here. Over time, the amnesic walls between parts start to lower. And as those amnesic parts start to lower, we as individuals can become more unified because we know our whole story. And so I have an angry alter. He's a teenage alter whose name is Mike, and his anger actually was I think the crux of so much of my healing, because he cared about me and all of my parts so much that he worked so, if we were allowed to curse on here, I would, so darn hard to get me to, to do this or to do that, to do the healing work. He'd push me back into situations that I didn't want to be in so I could heal from them. I mean, and he also had some maybe destructive, angry tendencies, but he learned pretty quickly that he could really make a difference for all of us if he channeled his anger into helping me heal. And so so Mike is the part of me that I embody now when I am assertive. And when I'm really appropriately angry with something that really is wrong. And that's Mike in me. And Mike has a twin sister, Sylvia, who holds my sexuality and my sensuality, which I didn't even have a clue existed, prior to, all this stuff happening. And now I think I'm a joyful, sensual and sexual person. I have a husband who is loving and kind, and so that's the Sylvia in me who relates to my husband in those ways. And so, of course, I also have other alters for other purposes and functions, but they are a part of me now. But back then, they didn't know about each other, and they'd go off and do things that were not necessarily good things to do, Right. So we had to become, so the tools of therapy that we need is to get to know our parts. And I would digress just a minute for your listeners, because not all of your listeners have DID. Right. Right. But you all have, we all have parts of ourselves, Now your parts weren't created the way mine were, but you still have parts. And I think so often we are ashamed of different parts of ourselves. And I just encourage people, whatever your diagnosis is, or if you have no diagnosis at all, but to get to know yourself. Get to know yourselves. It's sometimes hard to get to know yourself because you go into dark places. And that's why it's good to have a really good therapist or a really good friend to go there with you. But it's in those dark places that we find the gems and the jewels. It's in those dark places that we find the keys to healing. And I don't like the dark places any more than anybody else does,
Nor I, but.
Yeah. But that's part of walking through the wilderness, right? It's walking through the wilderness. Yeah.
And you have to you know, it's just like being in a forest. It's there comes a point where even you walked in at 8 o'clock and you've only been walking for probably an hour to 2 hours, but you're deep in the forest and it's darker, it gets dark. You have to know as a reality that if you keep walking, you're going to hit sunlight again. And I think that's the hardest thing, because, you know, one of my favorite books, Lyn, is The Never Ending Story.
I love that too.
I love that book. And Atreyu gets into this mucky, dark place, as you know, and he's dark and he's crying and the horse is dying and he can't figure out what to do. And it really is about knowing that if he just he's gonna make it to the other side. But when you're in it and it's pulling you and it's dark, I mean, God knows it's dark as hell. If that's what we think of hell, you know, I don't even know what hell is. Like sometimes I think hell is right here, but it is that moment where you think there is no other way. And what you just said about, you know, being very dark and wanting, you know, when you want to take your life, and because you cannot imagine that there's no other place to go. You're stuck there.
And I'm so glad that you've said that, because I will say that too at times, is that there is light on the other side. There is absolutely light on the other side. I attempted suicide once, but I was suicidal for years and years. And it was always like, you know why I didn't, just because, again, it's because it was like I was so darn angry. A part of me was so darn angry that not only is your life a mess, but you even failed at suicide, you know? And so I thought to myself, well, I'm not going to do it again. If I do it again, I'm gonna succeed, you know? And so the whole time I never was quite sure if I could succeed. And I would slowly get little lights, you know, and slivers of awareness or understanding that, yeah, there is another side. There is another side. And one of the advantages actually of DID is that we do have these different altars, and usually there are some altars who hold happiness. There are some altars who hold joy or something good in your life, even though most of them may hold really ugly stuff. Some of them hold good stuff. And so sometimes with DID, you know, a part that is holding something good can help and keep us, you know, on track. But I just always, I just want to reiterate what you said to your listeners, that it may not feel like life is worth living now, but you are worth it. And I am the happy ending story. And that's what I like to be here, because I did not think I was worth it. And I, believe me, I've only shared a little thimbleful of the story of the horror and the agony that I went through over 20 years plus. And yet here I am. I'm 74 years old. I am so darn happy. I have such a wonderful life. And I have a great kids, adult kids, grandkids, a great grandchild I have.
Oh man.
I do, yeah. And a good man who loves me, and I'm independent, and I'm happy. I'm happy, and I'm fulfilled. And so if I could come, that's why I wrote the book. If I could come from there to here, maybe I can hold out hope for other people, you know, who are still there. Who are still there. Yeah.
Tell our audience, because we're at the end of our time, but tell our audience about the title of the book. And I'm sure they can get it through Amazon or I know there's a lot of other book process places to get, but you know, the Amazon just came to my mind. Folks know that I don't always get my books from Amazon. Because people come at me after Lyn going, oh, there's this. I'm like, I know. But yeah, tell them the name of the book, where they can get it, and then we'll go from there. And then you have a blog also, is that correct?
I do. So the book is called Crazy: Reclaiming Life from the Shadow of Traumatic Memory. And you can get it anywhere you get books. Even you can even go into a bricks and mortar bookstore and order it. They probably won't have it on the shelf, but they'll order it for you. But you can get it from Amazon, from Barnes and Noble, and there's all kinds of other online bookstores that you can go to. And it's in hardback, it's paperback, and it's on ebook, Kindle. So you can get it in any of those forms. I write a weekly blog, and I send it out as a newsletter, but it's also up on my page. I actually have two websites, and both of them have my blog on it. You can go to www.lynbarrett.com, LYNBARRETT. And I also have a website that's called dissociativewriters.com. And I want to just mention that to you, because what I have been doing, about a year and a half ago, I started a writer's workshop for people with dissociative disorders. And it's been just amazing to watch it grow. We have it. You don't have to have DID. There's several other dissociative disorders that qualify,
Okay.
And but mainly it's just a place for people to come and support each other in their writing. Some people write poetry, some write prose, some are writing memoir. I have someone who's just signed up who's writing fiction, but almost always their writing draws from their pain and from their experiences, and they can share their writing here in a safe place with other people who really understand. I mean, really understand. And so we actually have graduated from one workshop to two workshops, and we're actually going to be starting a social hangout for people with dissociative disorders, just because we tend to be very isolated.
I was going to say.
We may not even know we have a disorder ourselves, but we may know, but we don't think anybody else does, and we will never tell. We never tell.
No.
So that really isolates us. And so this is an opportunity to get together with people who are who also have dissociative disorders, and so the social hangout is for that purpose, really. But the workshops are for people who really want to write. Either they're doing writing now or they want to start writing. So go to www.dissociativedisorders.com and look at what we have. And if you're interested in writing, you don't have to be a published writer. You don't have to be excellent at what you do. You can write a couple of scribbles. You can write a paragraph. It'll all be valued. It's all worthwhile.
I love the idea of taking pain and putting it in poetry and just writing about it. Lyn, I am blessed to have lived long enough to overcome some generational pain and things that weren't actually inflicted upon me by my family members, but the community and the world around me. And people don't realize that with every little snip of pain that nips away at you, it nips away at your joy and your ability to embrace it as yours, right? Because you don't think you deserve it by the time everybody takes a little snip of it away from you. And you just, before you know it, you're just saying, I don't deserve it. And what you have shared with us today, and I thank you so much for your book, Please get it, you guys. I've ordered my copy. It just didn't come in enough time for this morning. But I'm going to read it because I also think journaling, what Lyn is talking about, reading and hearing other people's stories, not because they're trying to vomit their lives on you for sympathy or anything like that. Stop thinking with that brain. People are sharing their stories so that maybe one little piece of what Lyn said this morning, you go, oh my God, that resonates with me. You may not even have DID, but you may have had a traumatic experience that you have not shared with anybody else, that you think you're taking to your grave and nobody knows there's something going on, right? Because I have stuff that I'm still working on, and somebody could say something in a meeting and I go right back into that space.
That's right, you do.
And right? And it takes everything that I have, everything, to realize it's not that individual. Like Lyn said, to recognize where it's coming from, that it's coming from a trauma somewhere else that happened to me, but boy, it's resonating in this moment. To give myself, oh my God, to give myself a little like, you're okay, girlfriend. It's all right that you feel this way. Empathy, sympathy, compassion. You got to give it to yourself, folks. That's what Lyn's talking about. And then knowing your story. And one thing I want to say to you, Lyn, and I thank you for saying this in the middle of our conversation, our wonderful conversation this morning. Knowing your story and knowing the components of it are so important. And one of the things that I realized yesterday, driving home from a long meeting that I had all day, Lyn, was that as a Black American, one of the problems or one of the challenges that I have is that my story doesn't take me all the way back to the motherland where my ancestors originated from. I swear to God, I had that epiphany yesterday. I don't know why, because I couldn't listen to the radio or anything, and I was tired of the CDs I had in the car, so I was just in silence. Sometimes silence is good, right? And that was what I thought. I thought, I love my life. I'm happy, but my life only begins as a legacy here, because I do not know, quite frankly, the address. Because I have friends that from Italy and all over the world, and they can go all the way back to that address. And I realize that has a traumatic space in me.
Yeah.
Not a ugly space, not a space that I want to be mad at other people or anything, but I realize that's a traumatic space.
Yes.
And because of it, now I have to do some work. Does it mean ancestry, DNA? I don't know all about that, but I do know I have to do a little bit of homework and try to figure out how to comfort that space. And I want to thank you, because in your conversation today, I realized you named it for me. It is a trauma. Yes. It is not just a reality of my existence. It is a trauma of my existence, because I cannot go home, because I don't know where home is.
Yes. And if I may just say one more thing,
please, yeah.
I'm so glad you brought that up, because there's a lot of research today that is linking trauma generations ago to individuals now, so that the biblical adage that our sins are carried on to the seventh generation has some truth in it, because it is there are actual changes physiologically in us when we experience trauma, when our ancestors experienced trauma. Mm-hmm. It affected physiologically their children, who passed it on to theirs, So I am also aware that I think there's probably been trauma in my family for generations, but I don't know what it is. And I don't know if I ever will, but I totally understand what you're saying, that your experience doesn't just begin with you.
No, no. And even the family that I know, the family tree that I know, it doesn't begin there. There were people frolicking and fishing and living life or whatever they were doing somewhere. And I am the seed of that. I am the ancestor of that. I have a Jewish friend, and for her healing, she had to go back to where her ancestors were killed in the Holocaust. And her healing began there at that moment, at that space, in that place but it was home. She knew she could go now to a village where she knew things were happening. And so that's all I'm saying to everybody. And Lyn, thank you for sharing your story. And you said this too, is figure out your why. I say this a lot to you. Figure out your purpose, figure out your why, figure out your spiritual gifts, and then go on a quest. That's why I love the never ending story, because Atreyu goes on a quest. And the little boy that follows him is on the same quest, but for totally different reasons. And when they figure out it's about not letting that light go out, then they can become, and they can overcome, become and overcome. And Lyn's book is talking about becoming, embracing, because we got to embrace stuff too, Lyn. It's unfortunate, but as I said to my daughter the other day, and I'm going to say the word that you didn't say earlier, we got to embrace some shit. I'll break the ice for you. We got to, before we can move on to that place where, and I always call it healing. It's that place of healing where we can hug ourselves and love ourselves. So stay on a minute, Lyn. I want to share with you all the suicide hotline number. I end our podcast or broadcast or vlog or whatever the terminology is for what this is. To me, it's meeting Lyn. It's meeting other people all the guests that have come on Life is a Sacred Journey. It's meeting people that I can say, go read this book. This inspired me in this way. Hopefully, many of you who joined us this morning were inspired to say one thing or think one thing differently about DID or about that dark place where either you go or others in your life go, because suicide is real, people. And I've told you many a times, the Michelle Pope today is not the Michelle Pope that, there's a history. And it took a lot of work to get here and a lot of people to love me. Hello. Thank you, Lyn, for loving me. Suicide hotline number 1-800-273-8255. I'm going to say it again. 1-800-273-8255. If you are feeling dark, you don't have a cell phone, walk into Starbucks and say, I need a phone. and there's a good Samaritan there that will help you. Okay. There's always one. Okay. The universe always sends us one. Not everybody, but they send us one. And you just have to be willing to tell your story. So thank you for coming to Life is a Sacred Journey. I'm going to say goodbye because I want to say something to Lyn offline. But I also want to thank you so much for making the beginning of my 65th year on this planet the most incredible experience for me. You know how I feel about life. You know that I didn't think that I was going to make it to 65, okay? I really didn't. And it is an honor and privilege that the universe kissed me and said, you're going to make it. And I made it. And all of you made it with me. So thank you. Go out and hug a tree, pet a dog, pet a cat, sit under the tree. I'm going to the tree that I will be buried under this weekend, and I'm going to go read to my tree. I'm going to read my tree, my favorite story, which is the never ending story. So be well, everybody out there, and love yourself, because you know what? When it comes right down to it, that's what you need in order to move forward in this world. Peace out.